Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
It's good to see everyone. Good to see everybody. I hope everybody had a good week off last week and enjoyed your Sabbath and a time with your families over the 4th. And we're back at it tonight, everyone. Welcome to episode 348. Yes, believe it or not, we've almost to 350. Some of you have been with us since the beginning. But how is America being destroyed for lack of knowledge? Dr. Ricks, if you would start us out that.
You know, we are the real groaners. So we're going to give you a few groaners. You can really groan with the best of them.
Well, they've had a week
Okay.
off, so yeah, get it.
Real groaners. How do animals blend into the desert? How do animals blend into the desert? Camouflage. Camouflage. Never mind. Why do bananas like? Now think about it. Why do bananas like gymnastics? They love the splits. Now here is the piece of resistance as far as groaners go. Mr. Doofus goes to a psychologist, calls Mr. Doofus in the door sign. And he tells his psychologist he has this horrible nightmare. It's weird. I'm locked in this room and I can't get out. I try and try. I can't get out. There's a sign on the door and I push the door and I push the door and I can't get out. I use all my strength, but I can't get out. The psychiatrist muses and says, interesting. You say there's a sign on the door. What does the sign on the door say? It says, pull. And maybe we'll have a coronavirus in the middle, joke in the middle of the thingamajig, maybe, if we think of it. Okay, pull instead of push. Funny. There's a real groaner there, Mr. Doofus. Pull. Everybody's made that mistake once. Instead of pulling, you push. Never mind. Okay, how's America being destroyed for lack of knowledge? There's a very famous scripture. We're going to look into it, but look into it in a way that may surprise people. What we're going to say today may be controversial. And if it's controversial, we're right and you're wrong.
I'm telling my wife that.
But still feel free to disagree, and you can email all your contentious comments to Ken. That's what he's there for.
I knew it. I'll just forward him.
Ken, I've never seen you have the courage to stand up and tell her she's wrong. You
I'd
say that with her in the other room.
Yeah, she's over.
Okay. Well, we're going to start off, how's America being destroyed for lack of knowledge, by going through a prophecy in Isaiah. A nation's has watchdogs and guardians. Well, Isaiah talks about a time when the watchdogs do not bark. They are silent. And I'll make a few analogies of the danger of being silent when you're in future danger. Let's say if you're driving an automobile and the warning light buzzer doesn't come on when the engine overheats. And you keep driving, especially if this actually happened to one of my sons. Especially on the interstate, that engine could lock up and burn out, just practically melt. Could be a real disaster. Or let's take another example of someone on a dangerous course, but they don't get a warning. Cities in ancient times had watchtowers on the corners of the walls, and they put watchmen to guard against invaders and raiders and thieves. Well, if the watchmen were silent, things could happen. Or if you're an army in the field, you put sentries in. By the way, in the past, if you were a sentry and you were caught sleeping or just sitting down and not a vigil, you could be shot. Even in World War II, I know the Germans and the Russians, you would be shot on the spot if you're a sentry and you were not caught being alert. So it's a obviously armies have a lot at stake if they get caught by surprise. And God's prophet is telling Israel that the clerics and other enlightened leaders are asleep at the wheel. They're like a watchdog that doesn't bark. 6:10, and we'll talk about what all this means as we see it.
All right. His watchmen are blind. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb dogs. They cannot bark. Sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber.
I read a book many years ago about a certain minority group that was doing very well, making really good progress. And then some bad government welfare trends and others came along. And the ministers, they looked around and said, well, you know, there are more people out there. I won't get money from them if I keep preaching things like you got to be married before you have a kid. I can elaborate on a few other issues. The guy who wrote the book said many or most of the ministers got silent on key issues when they could have had a good influence. And he said it was a terrible thing. And I'm using that analogy to say that is happening to much of the general public. A lot of bad trends are threatening America, and a lot of the people who should know better are silent or ignorant.
Well, people are always waiting for somebody to be the first. It's usually the way it happens. And there's people out there that are going to be the first. I'm not sure that we in the church should go out and, I mean, we should defend ourselves and our families. Obviously, we're not going to let people run over us, but I'm not sure we should be the ones at the forefront of the cause. I think we have another cause we need to be fighting. But we do need to take advantage of our rights as citizens. And Paul did. He took advantage of his Roman citizenship when he was in a tight bind. And there's no reason why we shouldn't either.
Yeah.
My concern also is that this says that the watchmen were not understanding what they're seeing. My concern is that will happen in the clergy. I'm told that one of the churches, and I don't know which one, they weren't allowed to sing at church. They had to hum the hymns. So somebody who we were talking to said they were at church, you know, come that way they didn't spread the virus. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Well, I can see that maybe the first time or two when you're trying to get used to some new virus. But as time goes on, churches should be able to do what they think God would want them to do.
In some ways, they're making it worse now than it was at the start. They weren't doing humming when they started. I mean, now any church, I mean, I don't know. I have a real problem with people that capitulate to things like that.
Yeah. Let's just take one issue. We'll start with one, but there are many bad trends inside. One is abortion. There was a time, and I'm old enough to remember this well, when people, at least most decent church-going, most Americans didn't abort babies. It was like a scandal that, you know, you didn't talk about. People just didn't abort babies. Well, of course, now it's almost a preferred form of birth control among a large percentage of the population. And here's the negative part that it has for society, and the clergy and other popular leaders should be warning about it. One, we went through this on a previous program, so we won't go through it now, but God talks about knowing the fetuses as if they are people, like Christ and various prophets. So God says the fetuses are alive, and God is pro-life. Satan is pro-death. But the other problem is most Western nations, thanks to anti-family values and abortion, their birth rate is very low, way low. They're far below the replacement level. What that means is that nation is dying. And you go, well, they can bring foreigners in. Yes, but it won't be the same nation as the years go on. I mean, the nation is dying. And one funny example of people not talking about the danger of abortion is Toys R Us was pro-abortion for many, many years. They gave money and they were pro-abortion. Well, recently, about 2 years ago, they went bankrupt. Do you know why they went bankrupt? They didn't have enough customers. They participate in killing off their own future market. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason we bankrupt, but let's face it, if there were more young children, it would certainly help their bottom line. They killed off their own future market, or helped kill it off.
Since 73, when Roe versus Wade was made law, they have aborted over the population. America has aborted over the population of Australia. I read a report on this. If children tend to vote like their parents, so the Democrats are killing off their future voters.
Well, that's why they have to import illegal voters, and they have to cheat with mail-in balloting. They have to. Then they've ticked off everybody else, and then now they need to import illegal voters. And
here's now our church is doing something similar to Toys R Us. I realize churches are a different situation, but if the clergy are silent about abortion grows, there'll be less young people for the churches. Now, I realize there's also education problems. Children are being educated to not believe in the deity. That's another problem we'll get into in a minute. But churches are also killing off their future market too by being silent on abortion. And I've heard people talk. Many ministers say, well, I don't believe in abortion, but if I dare say anything in church about it, I'll be accused of politics, and it may cost me. And like you're saying, Tom, somebody has to be brave enough to say something, and the pastors aren't brave enough to say anything.
When my son was in high school, the kids were arguing that if a girl was 16, 17 years old and her boyfriend got pregnant and she kept the baby, it would ruin her life. And she would not be able to have all the things in life that she wanted and could have had and gone to school. And my son stood up and said, if that's the case, if that was true, most of you wouldn't be here. So,
I mean, the truth is, obviously situations vary, but wouldn't you agree that the girl probably has at least two other options? One, in most places, she could give that baby up for adoption quickly and easily with no trouble at all. May even get some money out of it. Not that you want to do that, but maybe. Two, there may be other relatives who are willing to help or to take the child off her hands until she's old enough to help out. At worst, she might lose a semester of school. That's not the end of the world.
Here's the solution. Number one, don't force the baby's daddies to pay any child support. Don't force them to be a man in any way, shape, or form. Two, end all abortion. Three, end all welfare. Stick her raising that kid by herself. She'll start making wiser decisions about the next guy that comes along.
That's so true. And what I would argue is churches should be preaching personal responsibility, morals, not relying on the government, and society would be so much better off. But most clergy got silent. Let's take another issue, shacking up. It's related. I remember when churches actually preached against that. You didn't live with a woman until you married her. Well, you see the problems you get. I won't get into all the problems, but believe me, fatherless kids and all kinds of complex messes occur. It's sort of like a girl saying, I'm going to have a baby without a committed father. Isn't that cheating the baby?
I had a doctor a couple of years ago told me that he had, I don't know how many employees. The only woman employee he had, who was married to her husband and was also the father of her children, was his wife. And the other ladies called it getting a raise. You pregnant? Oh, you getting a raise?
Wow.
I sat through a juvenile hearing one time where it was, I think he was 14 or 15, shot his little brother with a BB gun packed with ice. It was snowing. No BB. He just packed the barrel with ice and then shot him with it. You know, why they were in juvenile court over that, I have no idea. Because, you know, I did worse than that to my little brother when I was. But at any rate, long story short, this woman came to the court with the child carrying a baby also. She wanted help paying for an attorney. And the judge looked at the record and said, well, I see you make too much, you earn too much money for us to provide an attorney for you. Now, this is the kicker, okay? She was making about $50,000 a year. She had 10 children.
Wow.
Including a 6-month-old baby. Now, there was no father at home. So that tells you right there what the problem is with society. The boys especially have no father figure. They have to have a father figure in the home to teach them what's right, to teach them this is what's going to happen to you if you don't do the right thing. And then, you know, smack their behinds when they need it, when they get out of line. And it's the same analogy that we have our Father in heaven in relation to us. You know, we toe the line because we know what's going to happen to us if we don't. And it's the same thing with children.
And the problem is that I've seen this myself. Over the years, church pastors got silent on all these issues, you know, because maybe won't be as many people putting money in the basket, or they're afraid of being unpopular or offending somebody. But the fact that the ministers got silent made the problem worse. And other, let's say, media leaders also got silent on the dangers of it. Let's look at another issue.
Oh, can I say?
Yes, sir.
One thing I left out of that story, which will kind of set the point that Dave was making earlier. This woman made $50,000 a year but didn't have a job.
Ooh.
So where do you think the money's coming from? Welfare from the 10 kids.
I've got one here. Somebody sent me this, and I just opened it just before I sat down. It says the subject is role models for children. Hi, I'm Travis Henry. I fathered at least 11 children by 10 different women. Then I was sentenced to prison for cocaine trafficking. Roger Goodell reinstated me after my release. His name is Dante Stallworth. I was high, drunk, and speeding when I hit and killed a pedestrian. I served 24 days in county jail and went on to play in the NFL. And got a tour with the White House with President Obama.
That name sounds vaguely familiar. Yeah, there's a lot of
NFL.
That's the guy who
Yes.
just was misquoting Hitler and saying it was probably about the Jews and in agreement with it. He's a goof.
Yeah. And as I say, churches got silent about all that, and that only made things worse. Because a lot of times people are afraid of shame. If they can be shamed regarding bad behavior, they'll do a lot less of it. I'll put it that way. But no, churches got silent, and so it appeared to the public like, hey, it's okay. They acquiesce because they say nothing. Let's look at the dangers of growing socialism. By the way, one thing you can say, people are supposed to learn from history, the lessons of history. Well, I used to do this in my classes. I would ask students, usually about 60 students in the class, I'd say, how many of you know the significance of the fall of the Berlin Wall? And usually we'd have 2 students who'd even know what in the world I was talking about, and they always came from private schools, not public schools. And I said the significance, we talked about the Iron Curtain and how communism and socialism, or communism, pure socialism, was so bad they had to wall the people in to keep them in. It was that bad. And finally, when the people of East Germany realized the soldiers on the wall were no longer going to shoot them, everything in Eastern Europe started to fall apart like dominoes. And communism collapsed in about 7 or 8 weeks. This giant empire collapsed because the soldiers, and the problem was the people in communist countries were dirt poor. It doesn't work. We've actually had some other articles we've written about why it doesn't work, but it doesn't work. Here's what's scary. Are church leaders warning people about the danger of socialism? Do you see it coming? Let me explain why it's dangerous and why church leaders should warn people. Both the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, but others, but these are the two most historically prominent, were anti-religion. They tried to wipe out the clergy and get rid of religion. And large numbers of people died. And we could tell you horrible stories about, let me just give you one quick one. When the Bolsheviks took over Russia, the Russian Revolution, their story was peace and bread and peace. What the Russian people actually got were government-managed famine that killed, and the range was so confused, no one knows, between 2 and 7 million. And they had food police. You read about the horrors of communism. And then the French Revolution, the Jacobins, with the guillotine, I think it was over 30,000 Frenchmen died. Whack, 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 bowls of heads in the middle of Paris, and other atrocities. In other words, those revolutions turned into anti-God, anti-deity horror shows. And that historical lesson, our young people don't know, and the people who should be telling them, the educated leaders and the clergy, are being silent. They go through 12 years of public school. They've never heard the name Berlin Wall. Isn't that amazing?
Well, most of the children today don't know anything about the Constitution.
Well, I guarantee you our youngest knows about the fall of the Berlin Wall because as his mother was in the hospital to give birth to him, she was watching it happen on TV. So he was born. So she told him all about it.
That's wonderful.
This day in history, one tragedy and one fantastic thing happened.
Yeah. Let's go to Isaiah 56:9. A lot of bad things, trends are on the way, and much of the leadership of the country, the educated leaders and the clergy, are silent, or they themselves are totally uneducated about it too.
You beasts of the field, come to devour. All you beasts in the forest, yes, they are greedy dogs which never have enough. And they are shepherds who cannot understand. They all look to their own way, every one for his own gain, from his own territory. Come, one says, I will bring wine, and we will fill ourselves with intoxicating drink. Tomorrow will be as today, and much more abundant.
And so Isaiah said, you got these greedy dogs who are watchdogs that should be barking danger. Well, shouldn't our educators and our clergy and religious magazines should be warning people about the dangers of socialism? Because it's an ideology that disregards religion and any deity. It's total secularism. It's not just that we like to believe there's no God, but we don't mind you believing in God. They're anti-religion.
Well, the schools are full of liberal and socialist agendas. Here in Texas, the main textbook used for teaching history is written by a devout socialist who hates America.
Wow.
And when you have that sort of thing in your schools, I mean, what do you think you're going to turn out?
You know, people in Texas should be, including churches, should be screaming about that. And if I realize it's probably we're not a big enough megaphone to make that big a difference, but still we can complain about it. But if enough people screamed about it enough, wouldn't some school boards try to get that book out of use, out of the schools?
There's a college that wants to do away with the Bible because it's fiction and wants to have the students study rather than anything out of the Bible, the great works of the manuscripts of the writers who tell you from the beginning that it's fiction. So he says it shouldn't be reading fiction. The Bible's fiction. So let's read these great other writers who wrote fiction. You know?
It is scary. We might have mentioned this last week. I don't remember. There's a Michigan, I think it's Michigan legislator. His daughter went to college for 2 years. All of a sudden, she is running an ad saying, I guess her dad's a conservative, saying her dad is a bad, evil, white supremacist, and people shouldn't vote for her dad. And he said, college has really ruined his daughter.
So, you should say you're not in my will.
But I can believe that college, as it is now, will ruin. By the way, there are college professors who brag, especially in freshman psychology and philosophy. Their goal is to take these young freshmen and turn them into atheists and people who don't believe in America. And I assume a lot of them succeed in it.
Yeah, this goes back. These people in schools, you know, I took a political science class when I first went to college. I was, I guess, probably 18, 19, whatever it was. This woman was from France. She had dual citizenship, French, American. I don't know how that works. But she was a devout communist. I mean, she actually literally spoke ravingly about communism in the classes. And I dropped the class. I wasn't going to sit there and listen to that garbage. She was a loony. I mean, this woman wore the same clothes every day to class. just to do your typical liberal nut job.
This is scary. I hear I think it's Seattle. They've been burning statues like Grant and other patriots, but there's a statue of Lenin, you know, who started the Russian Revolution, and nobody has touched it. I thought, wow. And, you know, Lenin's had I forgot the name of it, the Chaka. I think he came up with a secret police that murdered a lot of people. Now, Stalin put it on steroids, but still Lenin started it. These guys were murderers as well as political activists. They're not saints, and yet young people think Lenin is a saint. Can you believe that?
There are statues of Lenin and Stalin in our country.
And as socialism gets more powerful, many of the clergy say nothing about something that threatens the belief in God.
Isn't there a statue of Satan in Atlanta or somewhere? Yeah.
It's
I haven't touched it.
It's not Satan, it's Baphomet.
Is that the one, the goat with two horns?
Yeah, and his one arm up and one arm down. That's Baphomet.
I didn't know Boba Fett was had a statue.
I know all those guys.
You know all the.
Yeah, all the fats.
Well, let me. I heard this in the radio. There was a conservative legislator from Virginia that lost his office, 2018. He said he saw much more fervor among the radicals in Virginia than among the Christians who said, let's just ignore this and not even bother to vote or say much about it. And he said, now Virginia's totally in the hands of radical secularists. And they're total control. The governor has put draconian, this is his words, draconian restrictions on churches that they don't put on many other institutions. How you like that? They can do things in socialist rallies, but you can't do it in church. And he says, when the Christians got quiet, they didn't realize they were opening the door to people who will hurt the preaching of the gospel.
The churches of today aren't the churches we're used to anyway. Even even the nominal Christian churches, they're nothing like what they used to be. So it's not. I'm not surprised by it.
Well, they're all beholden to the leadership of the organizations. They have to preach what they're told to preach, and some of them know what they teach is not correct. I can remember a story my grandmother told me. My grandmother was a Baptist. My uncle, one of my uncles, or my only uncle, was a Baptist minister. And she told my mother a story about once asking her minister, why is it we don't keep the Sabbath? And she said, or the way she phrased it is, isn't Saturday Sabbath? And he said, yes, Saturday is the Sabbath, but that's not what we teach. We teach that we keep Sunday. So he understood that Saturday was the Sabbath, but they don't look at it the way that the Sabbath is supposed to be looked at from God's viewpoint. They've been brainwashed into thinking that it's okay to have changed it. And they're only doing what the Catholic Church originally dictated through Constantine, essentially the first pope, if you want to look at him that way.
The friend of mine was a Baptist Sunday school teacher, and they gave him books for the kids. And he says, can I just use just the Bible? And they said, yeah, that's great. It wasn't long. He wasn't allowed to be teaching the kids anymore because he told them the truth about the food laws, the holy days, the Sabbath, everything. He laid it all out. So he was removed quickly.
The lack of knowledge is beyond what we know to be the truth of God that we were given. But the lack of knowledge, like we're talking, it goes deep into everything of our society, from history to biblical knowledge to, even math has been played with. Everything and science is not science anymore. The left seems to be the party of anti-science, or science of ideology, pseudoscience. There you go. All they want is whatever meets, however you can twist it to meet their ideology, is what they believe in. At first, the mask was stupid. Now the mask is brilliant. It's back. It's whatever science whatever they wish to whatever fulfills their needs at the moment. And lack of knowledge is confusing of knowledge. It's telling you 4 different things, so you don't know where the truth is anymore.
They want. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, there's a term for it. Where they confuse people. They confuse you so much you don't know what the truth. They want to break down reality, so you don't know what's real anymore. In other words, a man ain't a man anymore. A woman can be a man can be a woman. There's no reality anymore. They're breaking down all realities so they can build their own reality, their own fake reality.
They want an ignorant class of people because
exactly.
You can rule a class. It's easy to rule people that don't know anything, and they'll just believe you because they've been raised from tiny children all the way up. Our schools have been infiltrated, and this may sound like a wild hair conspiracy theory to some people, but there literally is a movement that has infiltrated our education system to purposely do this to our children so that they can do what you see in society right now.
And it started probably 60, 70 years.
I have a school teacher that's a friend of ours. Saw her a couple weeks ago in the store. It seems like for a month. Every time we left the house, we ran into her and her mom. But she said that she's concerned that they're not going to go back to school, that it's going to all be virtual. That way, every child in the whole world will be taught the same curriculum. And that the school teachers will be hired to simply grade the curriculum. And little by little, that'll be done away with as well. because it's only fair that everybody get a chance that the American kids get. And so she's telling me that her concern and some of the other teachers' concern is they're going to do away with the teacher in the classroom and do everything. Why would states buy laptops for every kid in the state? That's a big waste of money to miss 2 months of school.
I just thought of something. You know, the teachers union is not for opening the schools. They could be putting themselves out of work, some of them. But anyway, I guess only time will tell. But you know, you learn less online than you do in person. At least kids do. And they know that for a fact. So that's dumbing down the public, like kind of Orwellian. You say words that have double meanings, and you want the people to be dumbed down. I would argue they're dumbing down the clergy, and the clergy and other social leaders are contributing to the dumbing down and the misleading of the public by them being silent or supporting negative trends.
Now,
some will say churches shouldn't mention any political issue like abortion or socialism or people shacking up or euthanasia. We could probably come with a bunch of other issues. It's too political. And so I want to answer the question, what is political idolatry? What is political idolatry? By the way, let's first start off by saying you will not have a perfect utopian government until Jesus Christ comes back. Matter of fact, that's one of the tricks of socialism. Hitler told the German people that. Stalin and Mao told the people of Eastern Europe and China they would get the communist utopia. It was an absolute nightmare of police state brutality, starvation, and suffering. And it's not even mentioning the war. That's a whole nother issue. You will never get utopian, and we should put no politician on a pedestal. However, remember, all issues are political. They really are. They're the ones that run society. When Paul told the Romans that they should respect the governor, etc., and pray that we can have peace so we can spread the gospel, obviously he was saying, pray for the government that they'll, be as good as they can be. By the way, do you know something people forget? The Roman Empire allowed Christianity to spread around the world because the Romans kept law and order. Go through the book of Acts, like in Thessalonica, when they had the big riot. You can read all about it in the book of Acts. Well, after they rioted for so long and screamed, one of the prefects and mayors said, wait a minute, you better cut off this stuff and go home. If these metal workers and silversmiths have any problem with these Jews and Christians, they can take it up in court. And the Roman Empire is likely to come down on us for this riot. You all better go home and be quiet. They actually had more law and order against mobs in the Roman Empire than we have in New York City and Seattle and Chicago.
Speaking of that, literally right now, there's a program on my television entitled "Who Really Killed Epstein." It's one of those shows where they take DNA and they hunt down the killer of the little girl 40 years ago. The next show on that was "Who Really Killed Epstein."
Don't you trust the people in New York to run a safe prison?
My concern is that we're in Matthew 25 right now, where half of us are asleep. And when it comes time to wake up, we're not going to be ready. We've got to spread the word to everybody to be ready and to.
Well, all we would tell people is look at the party platforms and vote the better platform. There's no reason voting for people that tell you they're pro-abortion, they're for a whole lot of things that are anti-Christian, bad for society. At least vote for the better platform. And that's logical. Let's go to 1 John 2:15. Look at what John actually says about worldliness. We're still talking about political idolatry.
Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in them.
Basically, if you support Bible positions, you're taking positions that are the opposite of the world. Because worldly people are materialistic, they want the latest trends, they're into euthanasia, abortion up to the point of birth, and even in 2 states, even beyond that. Therefore, government-sponsored suicide. Therefore, more marijuana for everybody. Actually, marijuana, candy, and cookies, too. Oh, that will never get in the hands of children. You know that, don't you? I'm
It's
joking.
not. Up in Michigan, there's a deposit. What do you call it? Depository or whatever they call them. On every corner, it seems like. Michigan is full of them. You go a block and you can get 3.
Well, obviously, children and teenagers won't use those, right?
No,
Because it's illegal to do so.
little Johnny wouldn't do such.
My only point is there are political parties that push this kind of thing. We don't want to be supporting them. And by the way, if you're worldly, you'll be going along with every trend that Hollywood pushes. Where if you're a Christian, you'll be speaking against many of the trends that Hollywood pushes. A worldly person would go for it. Let's look at 1 John 2:18.
Little children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come, by which we know that it is the last hour.
Well, we recognize John's words have more meaning today than they did when he first wrote it. As you get closer to the end, more anti-God, anti-Christ forces will be unleashed on the world. It's like saying when there's more anti-God unleashed on the world, is that when the church should be silent about social issues? That's when we ought to say even more. It's sort of like, it's sort of like, crime has gone up in New York, certain categories over 100% over last year. As crime goes up, what is New York doing?
Pulling away.
They're cutting down their police force. Do you see? That's illogical, isn't it?
It's mental.
So if the world is going to get more and more antichrist, we should be making more noise about trends in society, not being silent. Because if the Christians or supposed Christians don't want to say anything about all the bad trends, won't that make it easier for the world to slip into spiritual darkness?
Absolutely. The problem is half the Christians most of the Christians don't want to hear from us either.
You think a lot of the Christians don't want the Bible either?
They don't want the truth of the Bible. They reject it. They're just like talking to a nominal Christian is just like talking to a liberal. They won't listen. They don't want to hear it. They ignore it. It's not their reality. Christmas, Easter, the laws are done away. That's their reality. They don't want to hear it.
Well, the time is coming for the church. God will not destroy this world until the final witnesses come to it. And all people who are willing to bow and convert will convert. And the church at that time will be playing a big role because we will be performing those miracles because the abundance of the Holy Spirit is going to be poured out again at that time, as it says in Joel. And they'll see us doing these things and they'll be drawn to us in the message that we're going to be preaching. And the 2 witnesses, of course, that God will send, I believe those 2 men will go mainly to the government leaders and witness to them. Because if you speak to the leader and the leader obeys and the people say, okay, we're going to do what the leader says, then he's made the proper witness. So the time's coming. We're going to do play a big role in this.
Yeah,
right?
There's a lot.
It's not bad enough yet.
No, that's what
as bad as it is, it's not bad enough. And it's really going to have to get to the point where people are really genuinely going to be in fear of losing their lives before they're going to be willing to ask themselves, what are we doing wrong?
Yep.
Interesting. One thing is for sure, Jesus Christ spoke to political leaders. Scribes and Pharisees were the rulers in his nation, and he got in their face and told them how wrong they were. Now, I realize we're not Jesus, but still, so did John the Baptist. The point is, Christ was not afraid to speak to the ruling class about their, a lot of mistakes. Let me ask you a question. You all probably know that a lot of famous books like Gibbon's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire fell because of decadence from within, because it was very powerful. Decadence from within. Actually, near the end, the people in the city of Rome were so spoiled they were unfit to be soldiers. They had to hire mercenaries, which when you have to hire mercenaries to protect you, you see the danger of that, don't you? The loyalty is not quite the same. But their version of the welfare state and lack of morals. At one time, Romans were known for discipline and character. Now, we might not know that because most people don't know about the Roman Empire. But in its glory days, they were known for discipline and character and patriotism. But Rome decayed from within. The question is, how close is America to decaying from within?
Well, we're watching it now. Washington and the political world is so corrupt, and Hollywood is so corrupt and decayed and disgusting. It's hard to put in words, but we're there as far
Like they
as
say. Like they say, an election away.
When 800 police officers walk off of one police force in one city, when police tell me I'm not going to stop that car, they may have COVID. That we're in a spot. We're in a spot, and they're all over the country. They're taking early retirement, and then people are wanting to hire private security. And I'm being told some areas private security is going, I'm not going in there. You're on your own. And the minute one of those guys pulls a trigger, it's going to be, and they don't have the training that the police have. You know, some of them shoot better than the police, but the training the police have, that's a problem.
Well, and the main thing is they don't have the liability protection of a government police officer.
Well, that's going away too.
Well, it is. But it's still there for now in most places. But
the fact that the question is the blind or blind. Surely things going on in places like Seattle and Minneapolis, it's the blind leading the blind. The church had about it. The question is, how close is America to being at the point Rome was when it? I would like to think we're not there yet. And could we have some kind of reawakening? And not a total conversion to the true Church of God. I don't believe that's going to happen until Christ gets back. But could we have some level of reawakening in America? I was going to ask the question. And I'll start with Dave. You got a good pulse on the public, Dave. You think anything like that could happen?
Ask that question again. Could we
have some level of reawakening of basic order and morality in America and family values?
Well, no, not family values. You can't mix that in there. My concern is anything's possible, but my concern is Keith Ellison overcharging Chauvin, and he gets acquitted. It's going to be a problem. That guy in Atlanta gets acquitted. It's going to be a problem. I was in a gun class with a couple cops, former cops, a couple weeks ago, and the one cop said, "There's no way I'd have shot that guy that took my taser and shot at me." And he said, "20 years I was a taser instructor. The taser separates the further away, more it separates, I'm less likely to get hit." The other guy says, "Well, no way. It's considered a lethal weapon. I'd have shot him on the spot." So these are two cops that are disagreeing on that.
I wouldn't have shot him.
I wouldn't have shot him. No.
And I'm a cop, and I would have let him run. And we caught him eventually.
Picked him up later. Yes.
Yeah.
So he gets acquitted, it's just going to be more and more. And somebody's dumping money into this Black Lives Matter thing. I'm told Pinellas, one of the streets down there, not red, white, the rainbow colors because gay lives matter. Then a couple went and painted out over the Black Lives Matter in some cities. So they charged him with a hate crime. A guy burned a gay flag and he got, I think it was something like 12 years or 16 years in prison because it's a hate crime. But you could burn the American flag and that's freedom of speech. So I think we're too far gone. I think it's very likely we'll see things kind of level off a little bit. But what happens at the election, if Trump gets elected, they're going to yell, he stole it. If Trump doesn't get elected, everybody else can yell, they stole it. It's going to be, I don't see us ever being the same again. And I think little by little, we'll have less and less police officers. And then the first responders are not going to respond to bad areas because there's no police. So I'm not driving over there to save you because you bumped your head or you had a heart attack. And so that's going to be another problem. I don't really see when they tell you on news, this is the new normal. That means never going back to what was normal. You know, I mean, if I hear new normal one more time, you know,
You too.
I've got
I
have a little different theory. I don't think we're going to go back to the way we ever were, but I do believe that there's the silent majority of people who are awakening that are realizing what's going on. It's the minority that we're listening to in the media and seeing on television. And I'm frozen. So can you still hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you. I can hear you, Tom.
Okay, well, my screen's gone blank, so I may lose you.
it's not blank here, and your expression is great.
Okay, I got you back.
Yeah, your picture's from.
Yeah, it's like, hey, pass to Deutsche from the left-hand side.
But you can make your point. I think we can still hear you.
Okay, well, what I was going to say is I think there's a silent majority of people that are realizing what's going on. And we're listening to the minority of people who are being shown on television purposely to make it look as if it's the majority. Now, are we going to go back to normal? No, but I think the key here is these people that are in corruption in government that supposedly our attorney general has been investigating. If they don't do something about what they did to the president and prosecute these people, that's going to be a very, very bad thing, because that's going to just embolden politicians to continue to do these things. They have to prosecute the people behind all of this.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that it's like there's I'll call it an evil spirit in Washington, D.C. And that evil spirit seems to be preventing a lot of good things from happening. So pray for America. Let's look at 1 John 2:17.
And the world is passing away and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever.
And the will of God is to preach the gospel and warn the world as best we can under the circumstances. And so the next thought is our society being destroyed for lack of knowledge? And the point I want to make is, it's not just that the dogs aren't barking. In other words, there's no watchdog, watch clerics, or other education and let's say media leaders warning people of the danger. But maybe no one, or a large segment of the population, they don't even know. They don't even know what a bad trend is. They totally lack things that they should know are bad for society. They don't know it anymore.
You know, you look at what goes on and you see some of the videos of these loony bin leftists out there in the face of police and all this. Isn't it like all the mental institutions, the doors were thrown open and everybody just walked out in the street? Doesn't it literally seem that way? I mean,
Look at them.
They're so unhinged.
Yeah, but the loony bins are the schools that were closed and throwing everybody out in the street. These people they're coming out of the schools. They're coming out of academia. These people are nuts, and they've been trained to be nuts by teachers for.
Simply look at them. Look at the expressions on their face. This one we have here in South Florida with the cowboy hat on everywhere she goes. Ever not look? I mean, look at them. Hear the words they choose. I mean, I was watching today some committee or whatever, and there's a guy sitting there, and he's an old dude, and his hair's mostly gray, and it's greased down, and that got curls in it all the way around his whole head, like something you'd see in a picture from 1700s or something. I mean, look at these people.
I honestly think that, and honestly, I really believe in some cases we're looking at demon possession.
Absolutely.
Oh, I think in a lot. I think they're running amok right now. I think they've been unleashed on the population. It's
That word, demonstration. Demonstration. And usually when after dark, these mostly peaceful demonstrations go really bad. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, put a brick in their hands and point them towards a Target store or a Wendy's, and they.
Speaking of lack of knowledge, there are even burning statues of Frederick Douglass. He was, maybe even, he was the Martin Luther King of the 19th century. Really, as far as leadership goes, had a lot to do with ending slavery, a whole bunch of stuff. And they're burning his statues down. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. They don't know anything, do they?
The McDonald's where that man was shot in Atlanta, it was owned by blacks. It was in a primarily black neighborhood, but they burned it down. So, their whole Black Lives Matter. Well, the black lives that own that McDonald's didn't really seem to matter too much to them.
And it might have been an Antifa person that burned it down, I was told. But it doesn't really matter. And then the mayor of the city turned that block or two or three over to some radical group, made it a no police zone, at least until they shot some 8-year-old girl in there. You see how crazy this is getting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They should rename Black Lives Matter to Socialist Lives Matter, because that's all that really.
Yeah, it's clear that there is a lack of knowledge, and we have decadent leadership where truth and integrity aren't that important. And by the one of the warnings that Israel had before they went into captivity came from Hosea 4:6. Let's just read that and discuss that, because we think that's part of the great problem going on in America today.
My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I also will reject you from being priests for me. Because you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children.
In other words, the youth are going to suffer the most from lack of true godly knowledge.
Well, that's definitely on the nose for the.
And I just wonder, how bad is it? I mean, if you looked at, let's say, talk show people that are supposed to convey wisdom to the public on all their talk shows, how many of them really understand human nature, right and wrong, morals, etc.? Not too many. Would you agree?
Now, there's a couple.
Yeah. And then you got all the Jerry Springers of the world. Somebody was watching something on TV, forget where I was, and there was Jerry Springer on there. I only watched for about 30 seconds, but well, you know how bad the show is, don't you? Don't need to say any more, right? But there are a lot of people that get their wisdom from a lot of these people on TV, or clerics who don't seem to know much more than they do.
Years ago, there was a guy who went to his church, and I guess it was a mega church or a really big church. And he walked in and he executed an abortion doctor who was a member of that church. Now, what was that pastor teaching in that church when you have an abortion doctor, an active, unrepentant murderer sitting in your church? Well, he was getting 10% of that man's money. So in my world, the pastor is guilt by proxy.
And I bet even if he knew that if you got into the Bible in detail, you really couldn't support abortion biblically, the pastor probably didn't have the integrity to dare say anything. Well, that'd be too political. I might get in trouble, make somebody mad.
Osteen said that the Bible, his writings were too hard on the homosexual community. It's already hard enough to be gay.
Osteen said that, the guy who has a mega church, like 14,000 members?
Yeah. Well, you have to buy a membership to the church.
Oh. He has probably the biggest church in Houston, right? He probably has the biggest church in Houston, Texas.
He brags about his Muslim congregation.
Oh.
And then there's a guy now that says, we're going to take land in America. We're all militarily trained. Just give us Texas. And I thought, yeah, Tom will do that. Sure.
Yeah, bring it on. I promise you, it won't last long.
It won't last long.
Yeah, there are a lot of people, if you ask them, what's the difference between the 10 Commandments and the 10 Bill of Rights, they would say, I never heard of either one of those.
Right.
Exactly.
I want to mention real quick to everybody to try to get on and watch the service tomorrow for us. So we've given out those numbers before, but it'd be nice. It's nice. We've had some people visit from other states and things.
All right, we can give that out at the end.
All right. I just don't want to forget. I don't remember walking in this room tonight, so I thought I took my glasses, and then now I'm sitting here. So.
And I saw these big nursing homes in New York, and I was thinking to myself, all the older people are warehoused in large nursing homes, vulnerable to the COVID, of course. Wouldn't it be nice if some of them were living in the house of their younger relatives, and they could pass on some of the lessons they learned to the younger generation? Let's go to Hosea 4:7, the same context.
The more they increased, the more they sinned against me. I will change their glory into shame.
Prosperity has made the younger generation spoiled and weakened. And that makes society even more closer to weakness. And let's go to 4:14. It's just the last line in 4:14 that I think I want to focus on. Well, it's Hosea 4:14.
People without discernment are doomed.
I picked that translation. Other translations pick different words, but I like that word, doomed. And when you look at Mayor de Blasio of New York, isn't he the perfect example of his discernment quotient is 0?
Oh, man, he's bad. He's the worst.
I keep waiting to hear him ask Yogi for a picnic basket. That's just what he talks like. The people, oh, man.
In the same book, let's go to Hosea 4:1.
All right, hear the word of Jehovah, ye children of Israel, for Jehovah hath a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor goodness, nor knowledge of God in the land. There is naught but swearing and breaking faith, and killing and stealing and committing adultery. They break out, and blood toucheth blood.
It got very violent, and lack of law and order in Israel before they went into captivity. There's something to think about as we see what's unfolding. And what should believers do? I think God wants us to become stronger in our Bible knowledge and our historical knowledge too. Because what bothers me about history, people don't realize history is in a context. The world is what it was. You can't judge. Well, I guess you can try, but it's not really fair. To understand history, you have to understand the context in which it was in. I suppose if I say something good about George Washington, I'll upset people. Yeah, but let me just say one thing about George Washington the average person does not know. Well, I'll say two things. One is the slaves on his plantation were owned by 3 different groups, so he didn't have complete control. But he prepared that after he and his wife died, they'd all be freed, and he gave them trade lessons so they would be trained and could be economically independent after they were freed. That's quite unusual, by the way. And he did some other good things, but the greatest thing he probably did was after they won the American Revolution, the army officer says, we're going to march on Philadelphia and make you king. This shameful Continental Congress didn't pay us, and Congress screwed up a lot of times, didn't pay them and didn't give them supplies and whatever. They deserve to be kicked out, and we'll make you the new king. George Washington walked away from absolute power. Now, this is in I believe it's 82, 83, whatever. I think it's 1782. And at that time period, that's during the beginning of the Napoleonic age or shortly thereafter, how many men in the world would have done that?
It just goes to show God chose the right people.
Yeah, I saw a thing the other day. It was a little Asian lady there, and it said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's blame her for Pearl Harbor."
Yeah,
See, that little girl would have nothing to do with that, know nothing about that. So I saw this guy had 2 ARs. I don't know how he planned on shooting them, but they're holding 2 ARs at the same time. And he was yelling at this guy in the car, and the guy goes, "What did I do to you?" And he said, "It's not what you did, it's what your ancestors did." And I said, "I wish you'd have said that to me." I said, "Well, my family moved here from France in the 1950s. I think it would turn his argument upside down.
There's so much people don't know about history, but all I'm saying, God wants us to become stronger in Bible knowledge and probably our family history and in the history of the country, because lack of knowledge is screwing up this country. Let's go to 2 Timothy 2:15.
be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth.
Yeah, we should become almost like a pro when it comes to Bible knowledge. You know, a lot of people, they run across I've heard Buttigieg grab a Bible verse and totally misunderstand it to push socialist agenda. And most people thought, oh yes, in the Bible, Buttigieg is correct. Their Bible IQ is that weak.
I think the last person I want to listen to on Bible knowledge is
You know, it's interesting. I had a discussion with somebody on social media that was advocating, they were Catholic, and they advocated, well, you should say a prayer to Michael and somebody else. And then I wrote back and said, well, how about let's pray to God? Why do you want to pray to an angel and a dead person? And of course, that just started the whole thing rolling. But they ended up at one point, I quoted John 6:44 to them. And they wrote back and said, what does that mean? You know, that just tells you people don't understand the truth because their minds are not open to it. And no matter what I would have said to this person, I never would have convinced them of what that I was saying was the truth.
No,
That's so true. You know, interesting thing is, if you had gone back 100 years, or even the days of Lincoln, when Lincoln quoted Matthew and said, a nation divided against itself cannot stand. Of course, he was quoting about Satan's kingdom. Everybody in America knew that came out of the Bible back then and probably agreed with it. But I'll bet you there are a lot of kids today, if they heard the Lincoln statement in public school, they wouldn't understand where it came from or what it meant. He's just trying to foment the Civil War. They, you know, well, ain't like with all that, but they wouldn't understand it. Let's go to 2 Peter 3:15 and 16.
Regard the patience of our Lord as salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul also, according to the wisdom given to him, wrote to you, as also in all of his letters, speaking in them of these things. In those there are some things that are hard to understand, which the ignorant and unsettled twist, as they also do to the other scriptures, to their own destruction.
And I think if we had a public, so this indicts a lot of our churches and their lack of teaching people the Bible. If we had a public that was much better versed in the Bible, Marxist, socialist political plans would have a much harder time being popular in this country. But the churches don't say anything, and they don't teach the Bible to the depth in which, even with the lack of deep understanding, they could still do a lot better than they are doing.
We have to stand up to these because all they are is bullies. And when you stand up to a bully, they usually back down fairly quickly. And isn't it a great thing that we have the Second Amendment? Because imagine what this country would be like right now if we didn't have it.
And they're trying to, by the way, one thing about Marxism and Hitler's version of socialism too is free speech was out. In Stalin or Mao's world, you only mouth the party line, and anybody says to the gulag or other bad things.
Just like the Chai.
Yeah. They like to do that in America. I sure hope they don't succeed in it. Let's go to our last scripture, which is Proverbs 24.
If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. Rescue those who are being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, behold, we did not know this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who keeps watch over your soul know it? And will he not requite man according to his work?
That scripture actually is an indictment saying you really deep down know that the way society is going is wrong, and you said nothing. In other words, you didn't hold back their feet from stumbling. Now, maybe we can't stop people from stumbling, but we can at least warn them that they're going in a bad direction. And the Bible says that if we do say nothing, we're guilty. We're not going to read Ezekiel's 3:17 and 19, and it's later and also in Ezekiel 33. But God just basically says, I made you a watchman. He's speaking about the prophet. But there's a principle we can use his words today. The Old Testament prophets' words today. That's why they're written. That as a watchman, if you don't warn the people and they go in directions that lead to their destruction, God will hold you guilty also because you didn't warn them about the directions in which they were going. You're like a watchdog that does not bark. So we can talk about political issues because they do affect all kinds of things. I didn't even bring up all the issues, but there are all kinds of issues where who's in charge of the government can make a world of difference. I say right now, you look at blue cities versus cities run by Republicans, isn't the difference almost night and day?
Oh, yeah.
It is, literally. Can I say something that may sound controversial to some? There are some in the church that believe we should not take part in elections because God chooses who leads the governments. And I do believe he does do that. But let's apply logic to this situation. Let's say that God does pick our presidents. Okay, now that means that he's using us to pick his choice because we vote, don't we? And we always elect the president. So that means God is using us. So why wouldn't you want to vote if you believe the way God is choosing our leaders in this country is through us?
That's a real good point, Tom.
Yeah, there's a pretty large group that think that way.
I understand it. I don't want to be involved in the world, and whatever happens, happens. But there's another way of looking at it. If you pray God, give us the best government we can under the circumstances. Well, but you can do more than pray. You can also vote. And maybe influence a few relatives and friends. Maybe. Dangerous, but, are you scared of saying something to somebody?
Right.
And I don't believe we'd be opposing God by making a selection, because we can't thwart God's plan anyway. It's going to happen the way he wants it to happen. And no matter how we vote, if he wants the other person to win, the other person somehow will win. I mean, that's just the way things will work.
Yeah, I think it's not wrong.
I also feel like some of this. I also feel like some of some of it is on us, because if we all become corrupt to the point where we don't care about morality, we're going to pick the one that's not moral. So a lot of it is going to go the way that we're in this country. Just like God letting the people in Israel have their king. He said, yes, I'll let you have a king, but this is the kind of king you're going to get, because I'm going to make sure you get this kind of a king.
Give them what they want, right?
That's right.
Someday, I think if enough Americans want really, really bad government, God will let them have it. But we don't have to cooperate in it, right? There are people who have suffered so we can have the right to vote. So I don't see any reason not to use it.
I don't either.
And
and
also, most of course, pray.
I think you'd have to answer more for not doing it than actually voting. I think you'd have more to answer for if you didn't vote and things went bad. Look, you had an opportunity to do something about this. You did nothing.
Yeah, and you said nothing, which might influence somebody else. You saw the bad trends coming, and you said nothing. We need to, 58:1 says something similar to Ezekiel. God expects people to be warned about their bad choices, and to whatever extent we can. And I know you're going to say, well, we're small potatoes. That's true, but do what you can anyway, right?
You never know what influence you'll have on somebody.
And it could be that some elections have come down to just a few hundred people in one state. I believe that's happened once or twice. I won't guarantee it'll happen again, but it's not impossible, is it?
Yeah, we could have more hanging chairs.
I know
the Cubans put an end to that garbage. Do you remember that? Anybody remember? Thanks to the Cubans.
Oh, yeah.
They were going to keep counting and counting until they finally got what they wanted, and then they were going to say, now let's stop.
That's how they work now. They keep counting till the Democrat wins. That's how
Yeah. They don't have any integrity. I think they would honestly say, we don't mind cheating to win. It's all part of communists and socialists say, I think they're famous. It's from the French Revolution, but the Russians used it too. You got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Anyway.
Yeah, was that 100?
Yeah. Next week, we're going to look at, we're going to look at an extension of the Fifth Amendment, why we should honor parents, great-grandparents, and our forefathers. The Fifth Amendment. I think there's a lot to be further understood about why that's good.
Well, if we're done, can I throw out my Zoom meeting number?
I was just going to remember.
833-889-9186. 11 o'clock Eastern Time.
Just to recap, 833-8899-18.
I don't like your cadence, but yeah, that's the number.
Pardon.
Well, I want to thank everybody for watching and for all the hard work that Ken puts in, and you other guys a little bit too.
What's that?
Honestly, Ken puts a lot into this.
Yeah, I want to give
this
Ken
all
his
on Ken.
Are you harassing?
No, sir. I'm saying something kind. I don't do that about you very often, so I thought I'd go ahead and give it a shot once. It doesn't feel
Someone
as bad
did
as I
ask-
thought it would.
Somebody, I don't know why they asked this question, but they did in the chat room, so I'll pose it. I know the answer already, but it says, so God is okay with us voting for.
Is that what we said?
Okay, only for
That's
that what
what
we
was
said?
said.
No.
only for you, dude.
So
Whoever it was, only for you.
Since I brought this up, let me answer. And I'm not laughing at the individual. You'll never find a perfect person in this world, in or outside of the church. And if you want to have your country go in a direction that's better than not, then you should select the best choice. I realize there's no perfect choice. There never will be. There never has been. But you have to do what you think is right. Now, you don't have to vote, but then not voting might allow the worst choice to get into power, which I wouldn't want either. You're not voting for evil. You're voting for what you believe is the best that you can do for your country. And you know, we are all evil. The Bible tells us, God says, there's no good in man. Man is inherently from his birth evil. So,
To me, the choice is fairly simple. Anyone who opposes abortion and you think will do something to eliminate abortion to me is a fairly decent choice for whatever office you're voting for. Usually there's one that's for it and one against it, usually. And you got to do your homework. Just because everybody on the news tells you this guy's evil doesn't necessarily mean he is. You got to do your own work. And you got to see what his actions are and his past actions are, not just what everybody's telling you about that person.
Oh, I learned years ago our media is evil. So if our media is evil and they tell you a particular candidate is evil by the way in which they cover him, that tends to make me think the exact opposite is true. You realize you don't actually know anybody, you know, who's in politics or Hollywood. You only know what the media, the image the media projects of him. And they can project a negative image. You go, oh, he's bad. I tell people, look at the party platform. Compare the two party platforms. One is secular, anti-God, pro-abortion, anti-family values, anti-private property, anti-second gun ownership. I can go on. I had to get into some other stuff.
And they booed God at their convention.
And they booed God. Now you're going to tell me you can't decide which of the two is the better party platform? You'd have to be. But I listen to NBC, and NBC's anchor tells me, boy, and I know a lot of people are naive about how bad our media is. The mainstream media is far left radicals. By the way, almost all journalism colleges now are far left. You wouldn't believe how far left they are. So should we be surprised that the journalists on NBC News are far left? So you can't rely on the media, and that includes ministers. Oh, the movie star I like best. What is that lady's name that wears all the red lipstick? Oh, I can't think of her name now. But anyway, she says Trump is the devil. Oh, I gotta believe her. What is her name?
Stormy Daniels.
I'm laughing. I can't think of her name either. But is that where you're gonna make your decision based on Hollywood and the left-wing radical media? Are Christians do we have that lack of knowledge?
And you also got to think to yourself, if you're siding with the person who all their actions, and you have to ignore biblical understandings to vote for this person, you might want to rethink your values yourself.
well,
You got to ignore Bible teachings to vote for a certain person, and you got to rethink where you're.
And who is supporting Israel, who put America's embassy in Jerusalem under great pressure? Who did that? Which party? People have been promising to do that for years, but the political backlash backlash was so great they were afraid to do it.
Right.
Support of Israel is a factor. I realize we can't see it, but you know the devil is against little Judah. And whoever supports little Judah is more on God's side than otherwise.
I will fall back to the logical argument, and that is you have to show God that you're trying to do what's best for this country. And by selecting the person you think will do the best job, no one's going to be perfect. And if you believe God is selecting the leaders, I mean, I'll go back to that again. If he is selecting our leadership, then he obviously has been doing it through us, because that is how we select our leaders. So then if you don't vote and God is using you, then you're not going along with what God wants. I mean, that's the logical argument that I present.
All right. I think we answered the question pretty good. So I would just like to say we kept you late tonight. Glad everybody that did hang in with us did. And I want to thank gentlemen. Good to see you after a week off. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Sabbath. And good
night, Ken. And Dave and Tom.
We're happy you could make it, so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we've got to say goodbye.